Hello ladies and gentlemen, it's the Historical Gamer here. Been a while since my last video, but I'm going a little bit retro here with All-Star Tennis 99. Not really retro gaming, although I would certainly say the N64 borders on the retro genre. This game was actually the first tennis game, according to everything that I've researched, to be featured on the N64, Nintendo 64 that is. It wasn't until a year later that another one came out, and that was the very well-known Mario Tennis. But if you owned a Nintendo 64 and you were interested in a tennis game, this was really it. I may be looking at doing some retro or older gaming in the coming, videos. Not all, I'm not going retro, but I'm thinking maybe one retro or one older game a week, or month, sorry. In this game, we're looking at, as I said, All-Star Tennis 99. Now, this game was headlined by one of the lesser likely tennis players. You've already seen it, obviously, as we get in here. Chang was the headliner of All-Star Tennis 99, at least in the United States. In France, it was Yannick Noah. But it's kind of an interesting choice because in the late 90s, Chang was certainly a formidable player, but not necessarily the type of player you would expect to headline a video game, in all honesty. Chang was a winner of the French Open in a very famous run in 1989. I believe he was 17 at the time. And he was always, a very, very good player. He won 34 titles. He won over 600 matches. A lot of people have compared his career to Andy Roddick's, both winning titles very earlier in their career, both being very good tennis players, but stuck in perhaps a generation of the greatest tennis players of all time. Chang playing against the likes of Sampras and Connors and Agassi. And Roddick obviously playing primarily against Federer, but then later against Nadal and Djokovic and Murray. Although Murray isn't quite up to the level of the others yet. Murray probably has more in common with Roddick at this point. That being said, he was a very good player, as I said, and not necessarily, though, the type you'd expect to headline a game. I think this era in video games is a very interesting one, though, because if you look back, there were a lot of tennis video games. Nowadays there really aren't that many games. There's the Virtua Tennis series, and there's the Top Shot Tennis series, and Mario Tennis had a Gamecast version several years back, but you don't see numerous tennis titles released every year. I did do a very good one on one of my earlier videos. Of an indie tennis title, and I'll throw it in the description. But for the most part, there's very few tennis games now. The industry's definitely decided that there's only enough people out there to purchase a couple of titles, and they're not even yearly releases. As far as professional sports are concerned, it's definitely one of the lesser covered ones, and you could say that's certainly to blame due to the lagging interest in the United States when you compare it to the interest in the 90s and 80s. But anyway, as I ramble here, this game was interesting to me because it's one of the few games in the 90s that includes mainly professional players. I kind of scrolled through it earlier, but this game actually features several professional players. It has five professional men who were actual players and 3 professional women. Now, it's interesting for another reason. I mentioned Chang not being the most likely candidate to headline a video game, and that's certainly true. But the players that are included in here, most of the real players included in here are players who were very good players, but they're kind of like Chang in the sense that they were never elites. One of them is Jonas Borkman, who never made a Grand Slam final. His furthest performance was semifinals in Wimbledon and the U.S. Open. The U.S. Open in 97 and Wimbledon in 2006. But that's kind of typical of the players that were chosen to be in this game. Another one of the players who's in the game is Mark, I'm probably butchering this name, Philopoulos. Sorry. Like I said, I probably butchered that name. He had 11 career titles, and he was a finalist at Wimbledon in 2003 and the U.S. Open in 1998, but never won a Grand Slam either. So, the game has several pros in it, and they're mostly all players who were right around the top 10 at this time, but they're not, elite stars of the time. It didn't have Sampras, it didn't have Agassi, it didn't have, any of the other players at the time who had won, numerous titles. On the women's side, it similarly, there were players who didn't really top out as number ones. It did have Yana Natovana, like I said, I'm probably butchering the name, who was number 2 and won Wimbledon in 1998. But for the most part, these are all, very, very good players, all players who were at the top of their game at the time that this came out, but also players who you wouldn't necessarily expect to be in a video game. And I'll kind of compare that when... Let's see, what's a game that came out recently? Topspin, for example. Topspin, the last version that I have, Topspin 3, had, had Andy Roddick, Roger Federer, Rafael Nadal. And that's something that's, having elite stars in a tennis video game is something that was somewhat new at the time. Jimmy Connors Pro Tennis, a game that came out for Super Nintendo in 94. The only pro in it was Jimmy Connors. The same for the Pete Sampras games of 96 and 97 that came out. They only had Pete Sampras in it. Andre Agassi Tennis had, I believe he was the only pro in it. Except for, Agassi. So the headliners of the games generally were the only ones who were the pros in it. There was one notable exception, and that came out previous to All-Star Tennis 99, and that one was a game that was actually an ATP game. So it was called ATP Tour Championship Tennis, and that had numerous, that had 40 licensed ATP players, as well as some legends, and that came out in 1994, 95 in Australia, but 94 everywhere else, and really was one of the only games at the time that would come out that would have numerous pros. This game kind of changed that. This is 1999. In 2000, games really started coming out on PlayStation mainly that started to include lots of pros. The first Topspin and Virtua Tennis games came out shortly after, and they were laden with pros, and more elite at that. But it was kind of a game changer in the tennis video game industry. And with regards to this game, it was one of only 2 tennis video games to come to the Nintendo 64, and it was very well done. We're just kind of playing through in this game here. We're just playing through a match, a one-set match at that, and the motions, that the players go through are very, very well done. It feels like a much newer game. The mannerisms at which the players act on court looks like something that would have come out of a game today, and it's really a shame that some of these games didn't get as much attention as maybe they should have. The camera angles they're kind of like looking at replays today, which looking at the replays back then, the early 90s. Honestly, watching some of those matches, the way the cameras move, the way that the replays are done, it seems like it's something out of 2012, not out of 99. Not that TV broadcasting was, poor then, but the technology's changed dramatically, and this game kind of predicted some of the way that the angles of cameras are used, especially in the replays. And kind of... that replay kind of reminded me of Hawkeye. Anyway, it was a very well done game. It didn't get as much attention as it probably could have. The PlayStation systems came out with a lot of tennis games, but like I said, this is one of only 2 tennis games on the Nintendo 64, Mario Tennis being the other, and really the only tennis purist game out there. So definitely something that was very different about this game and unique to the Nintendo console. And I think one thing that this game does that I really wish more games would do nowadays is get more officially licensed ATP players or WTA players. There really isn't a market for a big tennis AAA title, and that's probably part of the problem. But when someone puts out a baseball game, they don't put out, a third of the baseball players in a roster. They put the whole thing out there. And there are very, very few, I don't know of any tennis games, really, that kind of go into the detail of, something like what we would expect from any other pro simulation. And I get it, tennis isn't all that popular in the United States. Not as popular as any of the other sports anyway. But still, if you're going to invest the millions of dollars, what does it cost to have a more realistic career mode? What does it really cost you as a developer? It's just one of those things that I would say honestly frustrates me. I mean, Tennis Elbow, that the indie title that I did previously, is one of the few games that really looks at it as a career mode type of thing, and it's definitely something that could be worked on, I think. The game does have some more arcade mode style things, so you can play tennis where there are bombs on the court, and you have to, play, but you also, if a bomb goes off where you were standing, then you'll get knocked over and you'll lose the point. That looks like something more out of Mario Tennis. The World Tour is really just, you play 11 different matches, and then, at the end of it, you win. So it's more arcade-like in that sense. But the handling of the games, of the sets, of, the mannerisms of the player on the court, the ability to get to some balls but not all of them, it feels more realistic than a lot of games now where just the AI is programmed to be a whack-a-mole and you just get to everything. And, yeah, and I mean, as far as the play style, I mean, timing is critical. This I played on easy, but the game is very, very difficult, at least at the beginner sense, to get good at it. So, I mean, I just wanted to show this game because it is an unusual game in many respects, and it's also a game that I think a lot of people probably don't even know existed, and just kind of wanted to show it off a bit. So, enough of me rambling. Thank you for watching.